I had just turned 23 when I signed on to the Titanic's crew. I was previously working on board the White Star liner before being transferred to the RMS Titanic as an assistant storekeeper. I was very much excited to be on board the Titanic. I had never seen a ship of this size before, let alone one that was unsinkable. It was the night of April 14th when I laid in my cabin and all of a sudden the ship came to a stop. I didn't feel an impact. It was more like jamming the brakes on a car. As we stopped, I looked out of the porthole that was open and saw the sky was clear, the stars were shining, the sea was dead calm. I couldn't understand what was going on. So I came out of my cabin and I thought, well, I'll go forward. And I went forward to the well deck on the starboard side and I could see ice in the well deck, but no sign of iceberg then. Because it had well passed us, I could see all the lights shining on the water from the portholes. No sign of damage above the waterline. And of course what had happened, we'd slipped over the iceberg, and although she was supposed to be unsinkable with the double bottom, the iceberg had cut her from forward on the starboard side to the engine room. Now we had orders to get the lifeboats out and got the order, the same old order, women and children first, and we swung the lifeboats out and gradually filled them up. The first boats away were on the port side. They didn't have many passengers on board as they were afraid to go down. There was a 70-foot drop to the water. They didn't think she was going to sink, and a few of the first boats on the port side got away half filled. Don't forget we had 16 lifeboats and they each carry 50. If they had been filled, we could have saved 800, whereas we only saved 500. So you can imagine there were many seats in the first lifeboats vacant. I then had orders to go down to the storeroom with a gang and then get all the biscuits that we could find. And when we got back up to the boat deck, we couldn't get near the lifeboats. People were scrambling to get in and being pushed back. By that time the ship was lifting very badly to port and we couldn't get the starboard boats down. Before I had got my lifebelt on, I had met a young couple and let me tell you her name. It was Mrs. Clark. They had spent their honeymoon in France and we'd picked them up in Cherbourg and she was having trouble with her lifebelt. So I fixed that on her, and I said, you better get into a lifeboat, and there was one in the port on the port side. She said, no, I don't want to leave my husband, so I said, well, it's just a precautionary measure. You get in and your husband will follow later on, and I got her away, and that was that. I then picked up my own lifebelt and put it on. The third-class passengers were now rushing up to the decks, and there were 700 of them. They swarmed the decks and filled them up. I thought, well, I'd done all I possibly could, and I thought, well, now I'll go up and get out of all this scrumming and go on the poop deck. She was sinking fast then, and all of a sudden she lifted up quickly, and you could hear everything crashing through her. Everything that was movable was going through her. And then she went down and seemed to come up again. So I thought, well, I'm going to leave, and I was hanging onto a board. We had two boards at starboard port which said keep clear for propeller blades, and I was hanging onto one of these. I was getting higher and higher in the air, and I thought, well, now I'll go. And I dropped in, almost hitting the propeller blades on the way down, and I hit the water with a terrific crack. When I dropped in, there were bodies all over the place. And then I looked up at the Titanic. The propellers were right out of the water. The rudder was right out, and I could see the bottom of the ship. And then granted, she glided away, and that was the last I ever saw the Titanic. I didn't want to die. I mean, I didn't see much chance of living, but I was gradually getting frozen up. All of a sudden, by the grace of God, I came across lifeboat, and they pulled me in. There was a fireman dead in the bottom. There was about a foot of water in this boat, There was another man who was trying to get away from the boat screaming, and they were trying hold him down. The rest were women and children. I sat on the seat, and who should I be sat next to? Mrs. Clark, the girl I'd put into the lifeboat, and the first thing she said to me was, "Where's my husband? Have you seen my husband?" So I said, "No, I haven't. I expect he'd be all right." By this time I was in a pretty bad way. I was almost frozen solid. Then Mrs. Clark had wrapped a cloak around me. She had some sort of blanket or coat on herself. She probably saved my life, I don't know, but I saved hers, at least I think I might have done, and she saved mine. I sat in the lifeboat rocking on the waves. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my pocket watch to check the time. The watch had stopped working, presumably from when I had jumped into the water. The time was stuck at 2:20, so it must have survived for a short while in the ice-cold water. A while after the ship had sank, and you could no longer see the lights beneath the waves, we were in complete darkness. Only the lanterns from the lifeboats could be seen. We helped look for any survivors around the wreckage. Unfortunately, everyone we came across was floating face down in the water. We all sat in shock, trying to contemplate what we had all just been trough. We rowed through the night, the lifeboat bobbing precariously in the vast expanse of the Atlantic. The cries from the Titanic grew fainter until all that remained was an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of the wind and the waves. We huddled together for warmth, our faces pale and drawn, our eyes fixed on the horizon, praying for a rescue that seemed impossibly distant. The night dragged on, an eternity of cold and fear. The stars above seemed to mock us with their indifference, their twinkling light a painful reminder of the beauty and the cruelty of the universe. I thought of my family, my friends, my life back in England, all seemingly a world away. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, we saw her, the Carpathia, her lights twinkling like beacons of hope in the distance. Relief washed over us, as powerful and overwhelming as the despair that had gripped us through the long night. The Carpathia reached us, her crew lowering ladders and pulling us aboard. I remember collapsing on the deck, my body racked with sobs, a mixture of relief and grief washing over me. We were the lucky ones, the survivors of a tragedy that had claimed over 1,500 souls. I stood on the deck, watching the New York skyline grow closer, my heart heavy with the memories of that night. I carry the memories of that night with me always, the images of chaos and courage, of despair and resilience, forever imprinted on my mind. For years after the sinking, I was plagued by nightmares, the icy grip of the Atlantic pulling me under, the screams of the drowning ringing in my ears. The guilt of survival weighed heavily upon me, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the capricious nature of fate. Yet the Titanic also taught me the true meaning of courage, the depth of human compassion, the enduring power of hope. I learned that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, the human spirit can endure, can find the strength to go on. The Titanic, once a symbol of human ingenuity and ambition, now lay at the bottom of the ocean, a tomb for the dreams and aspirations of those who had perished. However, the legacy of the Titanic lives on, not just in the wreckage that lies scattered on the ocean floor, but in the hearts of those who survived. I thank you for listening to my story and taking the time to relive with me a moment in my life which I, nor anyone who survived, will ever forget.